How do you get it?
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Okay.
Morning, Louise. Only just.
Oh,
Quite faint.
one of these days, I'll get to grips with IT. Let's see if I can improve that.
Is it Berry's Global or something? Right, okay.
Hello all.
Right, thank you. Very good.
Well, we might as well make a start while waiting for people to join in. So morning, everybody. Welcome to our third meeting. And if it's all right, I just wanted to start with some questions because an awful lot of you actually private message me, which is okay. So we'll start with the first question, which is what should I do where the competent LEV provider has installed spiral ductwork on a highly abrasive shot blaster? So spiral ductwork will be kind of fag paper thin. And I passed it, highlighting that it would wear quickly. But should I have failed that? Any thoughts?
I'll give you my 2 pennies worth. It depends on usage, doesn't it? It'll only wear depending on usage, so
Yeah.
it's not a fail issue. Fail is whether it has control or not.
I wonder if they're thinking because it. I mean, it
might
doesn't
fail
say
in
if it's a
immediate
small
future-
shot
immediate
blaster or
future. But
whether it's a hobby shot blaster or a large one. It might fail quickly, I suppose.
You can make a comment on it and you can make a recommendation, but it's not a pass-fail issue, in my opinion.
Anyone else got any thoughts on that? Right, moving on to another one then. Another question I got asked is if I test the spray booth and the results are on par with the previous data, so I've seen that's the commissioning or the reference quantitative data, is there a need to complete a clearance time again? I do, but it just seems pointless when I get the same time recorded, if you know what I mean. I mean, I do them every time, but I see what they're saying. Although I don't know about everybody else, but I rarely get the same clearance time twice, even if the quantitative data is the same.
There's always anomalies, isn't there? There's always things
Yeah.
that affect it. It's always, well, to me, like yourself, it's always worth doing. Doesn't take long. But I'd be interested to know what other people do. The Louise, there's a lot of people on this call. It shouldn't just be same people talking all the time.
Yeah. Does anybody else do any testing the spray booths? Anybody in the group? A lot of you have got your mics muted. You can unmute it, and then if you look at the very top corner on the right-hand side, it will show your camera and your mic, and you can unmic it that way if you want to. Anybody at all? It's a tough crowd this morning. All right, well, we'll put it over to you. Has anybody got any grey areas that they maybe want to put into this chat?
What was the question around the spray booth?
Well, you're very quiet, but I can hear you.
Oh, sorry. What was the question around the spray booth?
It says if I test the spray booth and the results are on par with the previous data, so I assume that's like the commissioning and reference quantitative data, then is there a need to complete a clearance time again? I do, but it just seems pointless when I get the same time, if you know what I mean.
So it's always good to just confirm everything's working as it should be. It's not, you know, things change over time.
Yes.
Working, so why not?
I think just on the clearance time, it's a good way of showing operators how long it actually takes for the room to clear. So if nothing else, it's a good demonstration to remind people.
Yeah, they might get
this is what we're doing. You know, when you spray, it doesn't just go straight up the extraction. It lingers in the room, and it lingers for quite a period of time. So just from an educational point of view to the end users, it's always very useful to do that. So I would encourage it.
Things like the inlet filters, because they tend to be not very easily accessible, they tend to not be changed very often, so
Yeah.
that can have an impact on your clearance time as well. So I would personally do it every time.
And so it doesn't usually take long, does it? You know, it's
No, not at all.
Uh,
Unless you've got a DJ smoke machine, that takes forever to heat up. No amount of music can get me through that.
Yeah.
Right, I'll move on to another question. I thought this was another good grey area, and actually something I think we've touched on before in the LinkedIn message forum, but it says, what should I do where I have consistently failed a system for 5 years on the trot? I've sent letters highlighting the concern, got brought in for what seemed a promising meeting with the client's management to explain why it failed and their legal obligations. I even reported the failure to HSE. I've just been invited to retest and there remains no change to the system, and there's been no application of additional controls in the form of RPE. So now what do? I can walk away, but then that opens the door for another LEV tester to start again and go through this same rigmarole.
Walk away.
Yeah, but I see what they're saying. If they walk away, somebody else has to start that process. So that's probably another
I think you have to
5+
walk away.
years.
I think you have to make a point, put it in writing, and say, you know, we have a professional reputation as well.
Yes, yeah.
Unless
I've had to do
prepared to listen to you and adopt, even if it's going to take time, but start adopting what you're proposing to improve things. As an industry,
I was with an engineering
stand
company
up
that
people and, you know, what we believe in.
I had a similar with an engineering company, HSE intervention on CNC machines, and they agreed with the HSE to do a staggered introduction of, it was about 20 different machines. So they contacted me to do the LEV test a year later. And I said, oh, how many more LEV systems do I need to add to the quote? And they said, none. So at that point, I said, well, you haven't complied with the HSE's improvement notice then, and walked away. And that's the only thing you can do with your professional memberships anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you have to. I think you have to make a stand and sort of say, I'm sorry, unless you're willing to help yourself, we can't help you.
Yeah, I know we've talked about before a reporting function where
Yeah.
we've these failures, and the HSE keeps saying they can't entertain that, but for the serious failures, maybe they could entertain this, because we've got a few clients as well we've had to walk away from where
Louise, there is a letter which the HSE helped LEV draft on the LEV website, which is free for anyone to download and use. The wording is standard, so you just fill in the details with the customer in that. And I think you do report it. There's a phone number for the HSE you can ring up. It's all done anonymously. They're supposed to go and look at these things with sensitivity. And I think if you're that concerned and it's that serious, you know, we're talking about people's health, aren't we? We're not doing this because someone hasn't changed a bit of flexible hose or, you know, their filters are due for changing. The only time we do this where it's sort of prolonged exposures to someone on something which is serious, and it's someone's life. You know, it's someone's going to get asthma or cancer, and we have to live with that. So do we not have a duty of care to put a call into the HSE and sort of say, look, you know, you may want to go and have a look at this?
Yeah, he did write that he reported the failure to the HSE a couple of times, and nothing's been done.
Yeah. You know,
Then you've met
Most of us take this to heart, don't we? Yeah. But it sounds to me like you've done all that you can do.
it's difficult if you're just going along ticking a box and sending a report in. You know, from your professional point of view, is it really doing you any favours? I know it's helping pay the wages, but do you really need that work, or are you better off taking a stand against it and saying this is wrong?
Yeah. Has anybody else got any grey areas that they encounter when they're out in the field?
Just had a opportunity with a fabrication company where I walked in to do their LEV and did some air monitoring for them. And when I was there, the welder was pretty much on arc all the time, and they've now come back and said, we don't agree with your assessment to say we're high intensity welders. We've worked out from our welding wire consumption that the actual arc time is 15 minutes per day. Has anybody else had that? This 1 hour arc time per shift per welder does seem to be quite high.
So I don't really understood the question now. Is that to say they're only using it for like 1 hour a day?
That was their answer.
But it's still a carcinogen, isn't it? So to me, it's still ALARP. And, you know, are they using it for 1 hour? I think our recommendation would always be you need engineering controls with it. Now, if you're only using it for 1 hour, you can probably get away with a mobile unit, a portable unit. But if I would certainly be looking to have some engineering control on any welding application.
Well, my recommendation was for on torch. They make balustrades and stairwells.
Yeah.
So, being an ex-welder, I know full well that, you know, the mobile hoods, if they turn it on, that will be an advantage, but it will never follow the welder.
No.
And with the new on torch stuff, where I have introduced it, it seems to be quite responsive to it.
So just on that, so you got on torch extraction, and I think we all agree that with on torch, it doesn't follow the welder. It doesn't capture everything, does it? It always leaves something behind. And while there's claims that it's 90% efficient, I've also seen cases where it's barely 50% efficient. Do we all recommend other control measures are used as well as on torch? Personally, I'd like to see general ventilation to get any fugitive emissions. So building regs 6-10 air changes an hour in the background. I think it's 10 for a workshop. And ideally, the operator, the welder, should be in some sort of RPE. But I don't always see that. I don't think that's universal across the board, is it?
No, the HSC did recommend in their WL1 document 5 to 10 air changes an hour for a welding workshop, but they've withdrawn that, so I'm not sure if that's going to increase or.
But it's still in building regs, Louise.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
Building regs are a legal requirement. Now, whilst we go in and we test under COSH, obviously we're still looking at all the other legal requirements as well. As competent people, we still got to advise, under CDM you need access, under building regs you need general ventilation, and you've got to have a broad understanding of all the other requirements. You can't just go, COSH is purely COSH, and DESIR is another one, isn't it, which we come across every day in what we do. Yeah. And I know our reports are COSH based, but we need to comment on any DESIR issues we come across, because we are the experts, or we're seen as the experts. But it's on welding fume. To me, it's not a single. You can't just say that on torch welding is giving you total control, because I've never seen that yet.
I find most engineering welding companies are going on torch and air fed, because it covers them for both the fume and for grinding.
Yes.
Yeah, we find the same. I had an awful lot of private messages asking about duct velocities. Pretty much all the same thing. They're testing systems. The velocities are falling below the recommendation in HSG 258, but the duct is clean, so they pass it, but with the caveat that they should be keeping an eye on the duct work. Not that any clients do they? We all know that. But a lot of them are asking the same thing. Should we be failing those?
Doesn't depend on your capture distance. If they're working it well and the capture distance and the duct is clean, then with that caveat, the system's working.
I mean, the pass or fail is whether it's providing adequate control, isn't it? That's the line. That's it. It's providing adequate control of the exposure to hazardous substance. That's why you would fail something. You don't fail something because the duct velocity is below the recommended minimum value in a guidance document. If you have duct velocities that are too low and it's all clean, it's not a major problem. If you have duct velocities that are above the recommended minimum, but you've got blockages forming, well, that's probably a problem. So this whole pass-fail around duct velocities is a non-starter. It's about we're passing and failing systems based on control and exposure, not on how hard it sucks.
Yeah.
With that in view, then you're almost saying that you need to do some form of quantitative air monitoring at each time.
Completely agree with that, Chris.
Yeah.
I personally, and I know it's not there yet, I think air monitoring is part and parcel of LEV testing. Not personal monitoring. I think you're looking at probably static monitoring at the face of the hood, or just outside the face of the hood, to prove that there's nothing coming out of the hood and that the hood is taking it away. It's not in the guidance, it's not in the regulations at the moment, but I think, in time, maybe 10 years, maybe 20 years, that is where we're probably going to be going. Because how else do you prove control effectiveness?
I quite agree, but then try selling that to a client.
This is why we need the HSE to step up and put it into the guidance and put it into the requirement.
So I had a woodworking company who asked me to do an LEV test because they'd moved their system to a new unit. So again, said to them, well, it's not just an LEV test, it needs to be commissioned. Part of the commissioning, you're using hardwood, we must do some dust samples. But can you tell me where it says that in the HSE's guidance document? Again, well, you're not protecting your people, so I walked away.
Yeah, no, I agree. And we get this from time to time, don't we? Clients say, "Oh, show me where it's written in the HSE, in the law. Show me where it's written in the law." And it doesn't exist. But
No.
what does exist is, you're not supposed to poison your staff, and therefore you've got to prove that control measures you have aren't doing that. And air monitoring is part of that evidence. You need to prove it. Proving you've got 10 meters a second at the face of a hood just shows that you're moving air. It doesn't prove you've got control.
I mean, on
Dust
or wood dust, you're only, you're talking what, £6 or £7 a sample.
Yeah.
I can, potentially I can add that in, but if you're looking at welding fume, you're talking £50 a suite.
But if as an industry, if that's what we all have to do, then it's across the board, isn't it? And this is why, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying we should all go out and do it tomorrow. What we should be doing is lobbying HSE, so when they rewrite the cost regulations, which they're due to do in the next couple of years, we say, look, as part of a thorough examination and test, as a body of LEV assessors, we think you should be undertaking static sampling at the hood to prove control effectiveness.
Let's see what the weight of the insurance companies will modify that decision for the HSE.
Well, yeah, tell me about it. Yeah, no, they won't like it.
No.
But
that doesn't mean it shouldn't be done, or we shouldn't, as a body, we shouldn't be saying this. We're in the 20 years I've been in this industry, and I know a few people on the call have been in it longer, we've seen huge changes to improving the industry already. And, just calls like this were never even on the radar 10 years ago, 5 years ago even. So we're getting these improvements. We're getting, reporting is getting better and better year on year. Standards are improving. We haven't got to stop. There's no line which says that's it, you can't improve anymore. As LEV assessors, we can improve all the time, and that's what we have to do if we're going to stop some of these 30-odd thousand people a year, whatever it is, which are dying from asthma and cancer. We've got to do something better.
Mm-hmm. Kemper mobile welding units. What's your view about getting a pitot tube into the flexible?
I wouldn't. You're not going to get an accurate reading. You would just get lots of turbulence. Lots of turbulence,
yes.
Yeah, you get readings all over. I mean, Louise, you've tested enough of these units.
Yeah, never ever drill a test point.
No.
I always get my measurements at the hood with a hot wire, and I'll take, I don't know, a dozen readings, depends on the hood, and then I'll back calculate what the theoretical velocity will be in the duct, and just make sure that the volume that I've recorded matches what's on the rating plate, which it normally does. It's normally pretty accurate.
Yeah. That's all right then.
But if it doesn't, then usually your filters are clogged to the high heavens and they need changing.
So here's one. I mean, Chris, you mentioned Kemper there. You could replace that with any manufacturer's name.
You could, sorry.
Before we get into trouble with our friends at Kemper. But on that same breath, the manufacturers all know we have to measure duct velocities. They know we have to take pressure readings behind hoods, pressure readings across filters. Why aren't any of the manufacturers giving us standard test points on their equipment and saying,
that's a good one.
if you measure the flow here or the pressure there, you should get this number if all's good.
Yeah.
I in order, again, in 20 years, I mean, Kosh has been around since 81, 83, since I changed. Bill's not here. Bill would have told us exactly when it was. But this isn't new.
What would be nice? It'd be nice to have just a little spigot. It doesn't have to be much of a spigot, but just a spigot to put a test point in.
Nipple to connect onto. Or even a hole. Just a hole in the tube.
Yeah. It's not just welding fume. It's oil mist as well. You get those little filters, and you can't put a test point in. Yeah.
Fixed filter units, no test points across the filters. And yet to me, it's a no-brainer. It's something we should. And again, and I don't want to encourage people to do this because you end up getting blacklisted like some people, but we should be kicking up a fuss with manufacturers and saying, look, guys, why don't you do this? Why don't you put test points behind the hoods in the ducting? It only needs a piece of straight pipe, doesn't it? A 400 mil piece long pipe on a welding arm. But yeah, I've never understood that. Morning, Mark. Good of you to join us. I think it started at 10, this one.
Afternoon.
Sneaking it back in the class there.
Morning.
Morning. Another one I had a lot of private messages about is fail labels. A lot of people saying they're way too scared to put them on. One guy lost his last job because of trouble created using fail labels. Now my new employer wants me to use them, but says at my discretion. A fail label is the only way of getting the point across. So what do you guys do?
I usually would. I mean, there's a company I work with. I've done their LEV tests 2 or 3 years. I know that they're very proactive. Walk in there, filters are quite dirty. They've had quite a big period of time. I kind of said, well, you've still got 6 weeks left on your LEV test. Get them sorted, and I'll come back and retest. And that's where they were, rather than just banging a fail sticker on it. And it's about knowing your client, I suppose.
Communication, isn't it? And how do we get that? And education, how do we get it across them? This is what you need to do. And probably like most of you, I find most of my time nowadays is educating customers on why do we need this? Why have we got to do that? Why is that important? Even down so far as what happens when you breathe this stuff in? Where does it go? What does it do? And a lot of people just don't, they see substances, they have it in liquid form, they go, oh, this is it's safe. And it might be when it's in liquid form in a bottle. But when you put it into an aerosol and spray it around the room, it does something else. And a lot of people don't understand that. So you end up going back and sort of educate. So we have these long discussions, during the work, at the end of the work, with people saying, this is why this is important. You still get a red label because that's what the book asks us to do. But you do need to have those discussions, I think, to educate people. Otherwise, they get a red sticker, and I don't know about the rest of you, but we get phone calls almost daily from customers who say, we've had the insurance company in, they failed everything. Can you help us? We don't know what to do. Because they don't have those discussions. They fail it and walk away.
But I personally find the insurance companies seem to hold more weight. If we fail something, the customer might not take much note, but if the insurance fails it, well, that might affect their insurance, and then they'll do something about it. So for all their sins, you know, the insurance LEV testers aren't that bad. They do have the upper hand sometimes.
But they have the name, don't they? And like you say, that link with insurance, which, although they may not admit it, it's massive. It carries so much more. And this is why I get so frustrated with them when they do not the best work we see. They should be leading the way. They have the resources and the capabilities and the positioning in the industry to really lead the way on this. But unfortunately, for whatever reason, they choose not to.
If I could just jump in on that one, from just to make a point that the insurance companies are separate from the engineering inspection arms of them. There are links between insurance being sold as plant protection and things like that, but it doesn't affect their insurance on the inspection side so much. So there is a bit of a difference there. So
I thank you, David. I did seen you on the call, and I thought you response. You know, you're right. I mean, we know that, but I don't think customers know that.
No, and I think there's another point as well, that because they get things like pressure systems in inspections, and they get lift and crane inspections, and with the sort of same paperwork that we use for carrying failed status for those items, the only difference is you don't put a failed sticker on a lift or a crane or a boiler or an air receiver or a power press. But you do give paperwork that goes over the same, and they know in those such circumstances when it says and should be repaired before further use, in those environments they know a copy goes to the enforcing authority, and that can be local authorities or it can be HSE. The problem is, and this is the weakness again with the guidance and the cost regulations, is not having that ability to report back to the HSE where they get a heads up, and they might get a letter saying, what have you done about this? Have you repaired it? Or they might get a visit. So they sort of probably falsely think that the failed status may bring the HSE in as well, where it clearly doesn't.
That's quite interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, under certain legislation for other plant, you do have to copy the HSE in. Those are sort of legacy things, but they never wrote the cost regulations in the same way. The frequency is a bit strange as well with 14 monthly, but you know, other pressure systems has long frequency, but things like Lola and Pure, it's sort of 12 monthly is your maximum.
But again, isn't it surely it's down to the enforcers until they give the weight behind what you're doing? It's very difficult. You know, we spent years trying to persuade people to not use mobile phones in cars, but it's only when 6 points and a massive fine actually now forces people or aids people not to use the mobile phones.
And even that doesn't stop all of them, Chris. You still see them, don't you?
Yes.
It's a shame there's no one from HSE on the call. I don't think there is anyway.
No.
But it's something we've long argued, that we should have a reporting structure to be able to send. Maybe not every failed report, but certainly persistent failed reports. Like, as we said at the very beginning, those who you fail 3 times on the trot or something like that.
Yeah.
Should have some sort of structure in place to be able to report it. But they've pushed back against that every time we've raised it. Mark, and I think yourself, Louise, have been at conferences where we've raised it with them, and they're just so reluctant to even, you know.
They just keep saying they haven't got the resources. It's going to cost too much to run.
Well, see, I've argued against that. I did a talk at a BOHS conference about 4 or 5 years ago, because there was HSE inspectors in the room saying, it was one of the Ignite sessions, if you have a reporting structure in place, it will pay for itself, because under fee for intervention, they can go in charge. So what you're giving them, when we send in a failed report, we are giving them basically an invitation to go somewhere and charge, what is it, £75 an hour per man, I think it is, or even might even more than that.
106.
100, okay, so yeah, it's gone up.
Trade.
So it gives them a green light to go in and spend a day somewhere, having a good nose around. And at current, they have targets they have to meet to under fee for intervention. So it's a no-brainer. And if they hit their targets and they show that they're busy, I'm sure they'll employ more people because it's self-generating its own funds.
But the thing is, I don't think they'd be that busy, because if there was a reporting structure and we could go to our clients and say, look, you've got this, you've not fixed it now for so many previous tests, this is now a reportable issue that you're supposed to forward to the HSE, we'd probably actually get them to do something about the issue at hand.
Yes. Well, that was my, so at the end of my talk, one of the inspectors said, you know, we send all these reports in, and what do you expect us to do with them? And I said, well, to be honest with you, nothing. You could have, as long as you have a letterbox above a skip or a furnace, and these reports go through it and just get burnt. Just the thought of that report being sent to the HSE will probably get half of them to do something about it. Yes. Just the fear factor of, oh my God, we've got a failed report, we've got to do something. Because at the moment, there's no teeth, is there, in the industry?
No.
We're trying to encourage people to do this testing. I think as an industry, we've improved our game. A lot more people are qualified, a lot more people are competent. We're having these forums, these discussions, and we're improving our standards. And we're talking, you know, today we sort of mentioned about potential air monitoring as part of LEV testing. We're pushing that standard forward. But where's you need that stick. You can't have all carrot. And we're not seeing it. We're not seeing it on end users, but we're also not seeing it with some of the cowboys in the industry. And as an industry, we have an awful lot of people who go out there and do some shoddy work, whether it's testing, whether it's install, whether it's, you know, some of the design work, and we could do with something to stop some of that.
What's the model there is, you know, that gas safe and the gas engineers and the HSC's reporting. Surely, I mean, it seemed to work there, and you know, gas not doing things. If your gas safe seems to put the fear into everybody else not to do it, it seems to work as a model.
Yeah, I completely agree. Sorry, I was confused. Steve's mug caught me out there. Through me.
I can't see it.
It was the bottom of it. Got me confused with a cup. But no, I think the Corgi going into gas safe is exactly the model we as an industry should be following. And you know, yeah, go back to my LEV stuff. We were trying to do that with LEV and having the competency card, where it's a voluntary scheme. People aren't forced to join it, but the more people who do join it, then eventually, you know, we can say, look, there's a whole body of the industry have these. You know, 80% of the industry have LEV competency. Now let's do gas safe as opposed to the voluntary scheme. They would never bring in a compulsory scheme until enough people are at a certain standard. Because if we said we brought in a compulsory scheme today and said, right, as of Monday, everyone has to be of this standard. Well, who's of that standard? And suddenly you've got 5,000 people trying to all get to that same qualification, that same card or whatever. So you need that soft approach first, that voluntary approach, get a body of people up to a standard, and then you say, right, as of next week, we're going to do compulsory. And by the way, we've already got 80% of the industry up to that standard.
Or you have a big issue. You need unfortunately, you're going to need like a Grenfell situation that will push.
But we have
that in a different.
We have it every day, don't we? Is it 36 people a day die from being exposed to hazardous substance in the workplace?
Yeah. But you haven't got that.
This morning we lost another 5 or 6.
You haven't got BBC News. That's the problem.
That's the big one. It's not headline news. I mean, look at Bosley, the dust explosion at Bosley. 4 people killed. Headline news is on the BBC website. Only for what, an hour, if that. This and this incident in Plymouth last night. That's going to be on the BBC News for the next few days. And yet, we're in the LEV industry, we're killing people that sort of rate every day without fail. So what are we going to do? It's not headline news anymore, you know.
And then the headlines you do see, something came up in one of the Sun newspapers at a metalworks that I was at, and one of the headline news was a guy laughing because the HSE gave him an improvement notice for using a brush in a woodworking shop. Well, we know that's wrong.
Yeah.
But the shock and horror in that canteen where everyone was going, oh, I agree with him, you know, just like, no.
Yeah. I mean, this is again, it's education, isn't it? How do we educate people away from that? How do we encourage them? I mean, I remember, again, showing my age now, but you used to be able to walk on a construction site straight off the road in your trainers and your jeans and get a labouring job not so long ago, probably back in the 90s. And yet now you don't, you know, you see the banners at the front, no PPE, no job. And when it first came out, it's like, oh, I'm not wearing a hard hat, I'm not wearing a high vis, I'm not doing this and that. Whereas now you don't. You know, they really have turned it around in the construction industry. You don't, you know, we know it, we pull up to sites, we don't get out of the car unless we've got safety boots on and a high vis. And you see these construction sites you go to where they, you know, if someone does forget it, they have a high visibility pink set of high vis they give someone. So they stand out and go, ah, look, you've forgotten your kit. How can we do something like that in the LEV industry? How do we make it obvious? What do we do? Do we need to do an education campaign? Do we need to do some sort of some videos, some TikTok videos, or I don't know, something to speak to people to say this is wrong. This is what we need to be doing.
What one of my clients have done in Belfast is they do an awful lot of welding, and when they get the apprenticeships in, they do a lung function test. And then they have to have that lung function test every year, but they'll give them a summary every 5 years, and they'll tell them, with this rate of lung degeneration, you'll be on an oxygen tank, and that gets them using their kit.
Yeah.
I mean, I know it's far-fetched and it's a lot of effort for some companies to do, particularly the small SMEs, but sometimes I think people need to be scared into looking after their health, you know.
You do. I think you do. And this won't go back to what I said earlier. You know, I spend a lot of my time explaining to people this is what happens when you breathe it in. You know, when you breathe in isocyanate fumes, you feel a bit lightheaded. Why is that? Because it's gone into your lungs, into your bloodstream, it's being pumped around your brain. And they go, oh, what a root is that? You know, and we've got, you know, it is an education thing every day, on different levels. You know, when you quite often we see when you do explain to people, they do get it and they go, oh, that makes sense, and you know. But how do we get it out to the wider audience? Do we just keep plugging away and telling people these things?
Only will have the support of enforcement, personally.
I think you do. I think that's where it's got to come from, Chris. And I think the insurance companies have a big part to play because they have resources. If we again looking around this call, a lot of us are small businesses. You know, we don't really have the resources to take on a big marketing campaign. But that's what it needs to do. You almost need, you know, adverts in national papers. I know, and I think you were there, Louise. We at Bill's place once when we were brainstorming this, and we said, and this was probably 10 years ago. We talked about putting an advert on page 2 of the Sun at the time, not to the people who are doing the work, but to their partners, the wives and the girlfriends and the mums and the dads and that, saying, you know, if your son, daughter's coming home from work and they're covered in dust, you've got to be raising the question, what's going on? Asking them, you know, getting that message across to them. But it's for the, you know, we can't do it as individuals.
Oh, I mean, I'll go back to the enforcement side. Why do we recycle at home? Is it because it's the good thing to do, or is it because the councils have supplied us now with all the equipment to be able to do it, and we get stickers on the bins if we don't comply.
That's a good point, actually, because clients are supposed to do a risk assessment in compliance with the cost regulations, but how many of us go to site, particularly when we go to design a system, and say, have you done your risk assessment? And they're like, what risk assessment? So you then have to take some of that onus off the client, and you have to benchmark and kind of risk assess and design a system that's compliant. So I think Kosh needs to move away from putting the onus of the risk assessment on the clients and maybe saying, I don't know, you need like a form, I don't know, like a P45 type form. This form has got to be filled out. It's got to be made available. It's got to have all the information of all the substances you use, how much you use, how long you're using it for, how many people work at that post, what your working day is, everything, just a set form. And then that's available to all of us. It takes the onus then away from the client and it simplifies it. You've just got one form that you need to fill out, and that's just something simple we can ask. We've got such a long way to go as an industry, we really have.
But we're getting there.
Oh yeah,
you
yeah.
We're chipping away at these things, aren't we? You know, and it's considering we're all volunteers at it. You know, it's never going to be resolved overnight, and even if you do think you've resolved it, you'll always find new stuff to go to improve. But it is a slow burn, and it's certainly in a better place than where it was. Albeit we're not seeing the end results yet, are we? We're not seeing those deaths each day come down. The HSE stats are still appalling.
I suppose we won't see that come down for what, 20 years or so?
I think so. I think it'd be when we're long retired.
Yeah.
Because the long legacy element of the diseases.
I think it is truly a matter of education for these duty holders, because even when we turn up to do any examination, the lack of data they have to present to you, and the lack of interest when you ask for it is just incredulous. You know, they just sort of show you the door and say, get on with it.
Yes.
And that's the fact, that they don't understand it and they don't see it as important as the pressure systems, the lifting crane, things that can give them instant catastrophic failures and potential, instant death if it's misused. Those things focus their mind and they're on it a little bit more. You give them a defect on, say, a crane, and say that the crane steel wire rope is defective and needs to be replaced before further use. They tend to get onto it. You know, you tell them something's failed on LEV, you can go back in 12 months and they haven't done anything about it.
Doesn't all down to people actually using it as well, because we've had times where certainly what I've experienced is you put a fail label on something, but yet even people are still using that asset or that capture hood or whatever it may be, and it's got a fail label on it, but they're still using it. I guess it's a bit of naivety against what the actual potential issue.
Yeah, that's a good point, that is.
It's not necessarily just the people owning the businesses, it's the people actually using it as well.
And because they're busy and focused on what they're doing, they've got to do the job anyway, haven't they, really?
Yeah.
Regardless of the consequence.
I was just wondering
Sorry, carry on.
I was just going to say, Louise, I was just wondering if I could add maybe a subject matter to be brought up at some point. I was just wondering about the testing of vehicle exhaust systems. We see these sort of like Needham and Plymouth vents and all those with the reeling drums in this, the sky, or the underfloor extraction. But it's sort of maybe a focal point for what is best practice in testing these systems. I think some manufacturers take the hoods off and measure straight line duct velocity, and others measure at the face, and I just wondered if it's a subject matter worth discussing.
I actually think think it is, to be honest.
There's the big difference in results when you go up against some people and how they test, and whether they're considering the engine size that's been put on it, or whether they're just taking velocity readings and looking against HSG 258 and trying to think, well, where does that fit?
I think as soon as you hear or see that someone has taken the hood off the end and measured the velocity at an open pipe, you've got to call it for what it is, and it's incompetence.
It's one of those odd ones, isn't it, where you think, well, the actual exhaust pipe is probably going to be in the throat of that duct because it's a rubber cup over the top, and and 9 times out of 10 these workshops have got varying different vehicles coming in, different back ends of vehicles where some have got very neat profiles and you can't get a hood over that point, so they got something to use on that. And again, it's one of those that's probably a grey matter.
Well, I think it's great, but I think, David, it comes back to what we were saying earlier about manufacturers giving us suitable test points.
Yeah.
They know these hoods go on the back of vehicles. They know that they can almost be obscured by the vehicle bumper and depending on how they're placed and the exhaust pipe. So should there not be a test? If you've got a 10-meter length of flexible hose, at some point, maybe, I don't know, a meter or two away from the hood, should there not be a piece of solid pipe to put a test point into it? And then say, right, at commissioning stage, this is the flow at that test point, and when you come to retest it, this is what you should be getting.
Yeah.
Because it's going to vary on different vehicles. So, or if you do test it with just the open-faced hood and no vehicle in place, you have to put a caveat in the report saying this has been tested without, not in a real-world application, because a real-world application is with a vehicle attached to the hose.
That's true, and there's another complication in that most of these are single-point reeling drums, which then get Y splitters, and you've got maybe a system that's split left and right of the workshop, 5 points on one side, 5 points on another, and they can put varying amount of Y points on it, Y splitters. And how do you test that when it could be used in numerous different ways? Or how do you report it, rather? It's that thing. You could be there for days trying to do the combination of testing in every mode. And the HFC have said with the sort of the quick tool on the dust extractors in maybe car body workshops where you've got multiple tools that have got extraction on them. You don't have to have it with every tool on it. You can just it's the end duct. And then you do that, and then you get criticised in other places for you didn't test it in all variations. So we're getting a mixed message.
I think that goes to the commissioning, because the commissioning should be the system should be tested in every way that it's going to be used, and that should be documented. And then when you come to do the LEV test, well, you're just really testing to make sure it's still working and still giving acceptable control. So yes, you want to look at each of the Y pieces, make sure there's no blockages or damage, but do you really need to test them in every configuration? As
an industry, when we get a call from a customer who says, can you come and test my systems? We say, yeah, sure. Do you have any commissioning reports? And they say, no, or we think so, we'll let you have them. They clearly haven't got them. And this applies a lot to the vehicle exhaust industry, because a lot of the time those systems are put in by the company who supply the paint or the ramps or the oil or whatever. And they don't really understand LEV. It's all done in the same size pipe throughout the system. Do we, as an industry, turn around and say, I am sorry, we cannot just do a routine test of your system, it needs to be commissioned, and insist on a commissioning of that system before we test it?
You could do, but then you would get a commissioning certificate, and would that be of any value?
Well, no, because I think we then do the commissioning.
Yeah.
And okay, commissioning is a bit more work than testing. And I've said it before, testing should be the easiest job in the world, because all you're doing is ticking the boxes that the commissioning document highlight. You go along and do the commissioning, and if the system doesn't pass your commissioning, then you say, I'm sorry, this system's not fit for purpose.
Well, it's the bad practice installation, isn't it? There's the problem to start with, or the bad practice design and installation. The adaptation, because they just wanted to add another day on.
Back up the food chain, isn't it, to say, look, these designs aren't good enough. And I think we should.
Is that back to needing more British standards then?
Not so much British standards. British standards are a bit of an awkward thing, but the HSE, the guidance they're giving out, you know, their lead on these things. Melvin hasn't put his clock back yet either. By the look of it. Morning, Melvin.
Good morning. A bit of a nightmare this morning. I'm at my son's house, so couldn't get anything to work.
Just kick him out again. So yeah, I think we shouldn't just be going along and testing stuff which has commissioning documents. We should be insisting you have to have commissioning, and the same with logbooks, and the same with O&M manuals. We should be asking for them, and if they haven't got them, that should be noted in our reporting. Okay, you're not going to fail a system for no O&M manual and not having a logbook, but it's just raising the awareness that these things are important. Yeah. Commissioning documents, we should be having them. The customers should have them.
I think some of the problem is, I mean, we do hand over paperwork, but when we do design work, we're generally working for the engineering manager. And there tends to be, in not all companies, but most companies, hate and dislike for their health and safety. So they don't work together, they don't share the paperwork. And then every now and then we get a competitor phone up saying, oh, we're doing the LEV testing, you designed it, you supplied no paperwork. I say, well, we have, I can send you all that, that's no bother. Yeah. And all it is, they've been contracted by health and safety because it's LEV testing, but we've been contracted by engineering management, and there's some internal conflict there where they haven't been discussing the issue and sharing the documentation.
Do you think some type of forward in a report might be useful? Because in my experience, what I've often found is that it's not that people don't want to engage, they're either not confident enough to get it involved in the report or the work, or they feel they should understand more and they don't, similar to what you've just been saying. I always try in my report to make a very short story at the beginning, just to say why I'm there, who has asked me to go, to give some names to people so that when they read a report, instead of it just being a catalogue or book of references, they can see a name. So if they're a bit unsure about something, they can go back to the tester, they can go back to the person that originally commissioned the report to be actioned. It can give just some background to say, look, we received a notification from Bill Bloggs, who said he wanted to test his LEV system. He had a benchmark of, let's say, 10 milligrams per cubic metre of air, and he wants us to check it, but he wants us to use a particular document that they have in place in this establishment against which to check the LEV device. Because very commonly, I mean, the number of times I've read a report and I try to think, well, where did the tester start with this? How did he arrive at doing the test this way? And quite often, some little pointers before can make a big difference to, you know, people, as I say, engaging in the report.
I do think, and having seen a number of industry reports, reporting isn't our strong point. We tend to write our reports as we do the work, and we go through and we sort of start listing out airflow rates and hoods and all these other bits and pieces, and hence why we did the standardized report for LEV, to try and improve on what the report template looks like. We have to remember who our audience is. The person you're handing that report to knows nothing about LEV, probably not even what it stands for. And we're expecting them to understand that report and to act on it. So we have to try and put it into their language, layman's terms. And they don't want to see tables of numbers, because that doesn't mean anything. What is 0.01 of a meter a second? It's nothing. So what does it mean? What we need to be able to give across is a good, concise report of our findings, hopefully in simple terms, in one-page terms. Yes, have the rest of it at the back of the report so it's there for us anoraks to go and look at. But from a client's point of view, they don't need to know what a milligram per meter cube is. They have no idea, or what a Pascal is, or a meter a second, or meters cube per hour. That's just the technical data, and we need to get, as an industry, and ourselves included, need to get better at the report writing, and how do we get that message across to those end users in a format, in a way that they will understand. One of the things I've seen in the vehicle industry, cars, Audi started doing video calls of their service engineers, where they would walk around the car with a little GoPro or something and go, and you've got failed brakes, and you've got this failed, and that's wrong, and this is wrong. Would you like us to put it right before we take your car off the ramp and give it back to you? And you get an email with that report, and it's very difficult for you to then say, no, that's okay, leave the brakes, they'll be all right. You've got to get it done. So I don't think we're quite at that stage yet as an industry, but that gets the message across to people very well when they can see that there's a problem, we need to do something about it. And they tend to go, okay, yeah, just crack on and do that. To give you an idea, I've written a report this week on stacks for someone, and I found halfway through the report, I'm using terminology which people won't understand. Talking about thimbles and dogs and strainers and stuff like that. So I've ended up doing in the very front, what's it called, a summary of all the different terminology we use with pictures, just to hopefully people understand it. Now, do we do that in our testing reports? No. Yeah, we talk about text and LEV and hoods and flexible ducts and fans and filters and HEPA filters. Does your average customer know what a HEPA filter is? Probably not. Do they know the difference between a carbon filter and a HEPA filter? Almost certainly not. People think anything. Yeah, scrubbers. I see all sorts of things called scrubbers. Pack towers, wet scrubbers, different types of scrubber units. They're all just scrubbers. And again, do we need to do something better or something different to try and get that education across?
Yeah, I think
Surely HEPA is the only thing you get on a Dyson, isn't it?
Sorry, Chris, you were very faint there.
HEPA is the thing you get on your Dyson at home.
Yes.
I'm going to have to split out, so thanks very much for your time.
Thanks, Chris.
Chris, thanks for joining in.
Cheers, bye.
Bye.
See you.
I think people often get perhaps sometimes a false sense of security when they see reference made to this report is in compliance with, let's say, HSG 258 or a BS number or an ISO number or an EN norm number, because a customer once said to me, well, when you fill up with fuel, do you ever take a sample of the fuel and check that it's the right octane level? I said no. And they said, why? Because you take assurance in the fact that it's stamped all over the front of the machine, that it complies with a certain standard or specification, so you don't bother to check. And he said, I'm exactly the same with my LEV report. He said, if I've hired a competent company to perform the test for me and they say it's in compliance with a particular standard or approved code of practice, he said, that's where I draw the line. And so customers, you're right, they don't need to know all the detail, but do they need to understand a bit more about how they can find out more about the report? Because I think many people would be more interested in the report if they knew where to go and find out about it. They don't. They just take the report as read and think, yeah, it complies with the document, I'll go with it.
We get a lot more from our clients these days. We've changed our report probably 50 million times over the last 20 years. But now I've gone towards a traffic light system where I've got green, orange and red. So green's a pass, orange is, it's not quite a fail, but more needs to be done, and red is complete failure. And the customers seem to react better by seeing the colours. If they see a red, is, oh no, I've got to do something now. So I think that helps. The traffic light system, just simple colours, have the systems passed or failed.
We'll be adopting a bit like that. Yeah.
That's something which has cropped up a few times on calls and it's people adopting traffic lights. Is that a sort of general view of all of us on the call? Is that something we all like? Is that something we do? And as an industry, should we be doing that? I know Mark, who's gone very quiet today. I know he does a traffic light system. Anybody else do that?
Well, there are going to be areas which are clear pass, clear fail, and then you will have the occasional time where it's almost passed, but there's just a tiny thing does need being addressed. So yeah,
See,
we've been using it for that.
My view, Jeff, is that that's a foul. If you put your car for an MOT and you've got a bulb gone on an indicator.
Well, yeah, but then you've got on your MOT, you'll often have minors. So you might have, for example, my last one, they basically were like, you need to get that tyre changed in the next 3 weeks kind of thing. So
but that's a foul, though, isn't it?
no, that was a pass, but it was a pass that I needed to go and get something
Okay.
addressed immediately. So there's that kind of, there's a tiny area where it's passing, but you need to get this done to continued operation, or something as simple as the ductwork had stuff in it, we cleared it out, it's now fine, that kind of thing. Minor stuff, but yeah, I agree. There is always a question when you start getting into that in-betweeny zone.
I think you come back to this nemesis we all have of interpretation. You know, it's difficult, particularly when there is often no pass and fail number or no pass and fail requirement in a lot of the work we do. It's very much left up to the interpretation of the tester, but I think also testers are very much aware of the commercial element in their work, but they don't want to shut down a particular process and injure the manufacturer or the producer of a product just for a tiny small requirement that isn't quite met. But I think Adrian's point is good. Would you be happy if one of your family was using that piece of equipment that you're going to put your pass on and say, yeah, it's good? I always try and I mean, my main line of work obviously is fume cupboards, and whenever I tested them, I've got grandchildren that use fume cupboards now in a lot of employment and education, and I always think, would I be happy with one of my grandchildren working with this? So when I'm thinking of saying, yes, you can use this, but you need to make sure you do that, I always try and bear that in mind, and I think testers in my opinion, testers are people who really do try and work with a client. They really make an extra effort not to prejudice the client's position. And sometimes it becomes difficult for them to say, look, you shouldn't really do it, you've got to stop. Particularly if it's a client they've been working with for some time. The client might say to them, well, look, I'll get this done next week. If that tester knows that client and is confident in that client will do that next week, then maybe they might put a pass on it. If it's a new client and the client says, yeah, we'll try and get it done sometime next week, they may not be so willing to put the pass on because they think, well, I don't know this person that well. I wouldn't like to do this and then get it come back to me.
Going back to that, like I said, the traffic lights. For me personally, I've always been a bit of a fan of it because I think, as like say Adrian before, got to think about the client as well, because they're not going to necessarily know everything. Okay, yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's bad, and that's something that we need to improve on. And it's just easier reading before reading that report. You've got a transport velocity that's not quite level you require, but it's still working okay. You put that as an amber and say, okay, yeah, it's ductwork's cleaning, staying all right, but your transport velocity is a bit low.
Yeah, I mean, as an example, I was asked very recently to look at a type test report on a very well-known, renowned fume cupboard manufacturer's piece of equipment. And this report had been in circulation for 18 years. It had been through no end of consultants and clients and specialist providers. Not one of them had said the report was wrong. Now, when I read the report, although the report was wrong, it didn't mean that the equipment didn't work. What it should have happened was there should have been two reports written. So it didn't mean that the actual equipment had failed. What it meant was compliance with the way the report was failed. It should have been written as 2 reports because it gave conflicting information. What had happened is that this fume cupboard had been tested at 6 different air volume flows, and the type test report had been written across the 6 different air volume flows. But what had happened was the first 3 air volume flows were done with the 250 diameter ventilation, and the third lot of volume flows were done with the 315 diameter. So when you looked at the way the pressure characteristics, the K factor of the fume cupboard had changed with the air volume changed, it didn't work out. Because what you should be able to do is take the new air volume and divide it by the old air volume, times that, square it, and you should finish up with what the new pressure drop will be when you've got a new air volume flow. But it didn't work out. And it was only when I started to read it, I said, someone's changed the ducting. Well, it didn't mean that the fume cupboard didn't work because it performed very well. But if somebody was reading the report, they would see that it hadn't been written correctly. So technically, it would not be in compliance with the regulation because the report was incorrect. But from a user's point of view, makes absolutely no difference. The fume cupboard still worked. So I think sometimes you have to be a bit careful as to if you're following a code of practice or a standard, that something like that would not prevent the end user continuing to use the equipment on a technicality that makes absolutely no difference to them as the end user. Oh, well, just the upshot of it was the manufacturer wrote 2 type test reports and it was fine. It just got the second type test report written out by the type test house because they had all the original data, 2 reports, everything was fine. But for 16 years, that report had not been checked by anybody, even the manufacturer. He'd just taken it from the type test house and assumed that as they were a very reputable type test house in mainland Europe. And so he just assumed it was right. So it's not always the case that people are belligerent or uninterested, that they just have a lot of confidence in those that they use to perform the work for them.
Sorry, can I just raise a quick point? I just want to get everyone's view on kitchen extract systems and their relation to LEV testing. Now, obviously, there's been a lot of emphasis over the last few years on fire risk management. What's everyone's view in regards to should kitchen extract systems be regarded as LEV systems, and therefore should we be testing them 14-month intervals?
So there's a HSE document, I think it's SR2, which the HSE, when you speak to them, say, it's due to be changed, but it hasn't, and it's still out there. It says kitchen extract systems are LEV systems. And if you think about it logically, they're in a workplace and they're protecting people from breathing in oil mist, in effect.
Yeah, that was my view for a long time, but I know it's been a grey area, it's been debated a lot, and in some people's opinion they're not, but ultimately they're there to, you know, exhaust or withdraw contaminants from an operative breathing zone. So in my opinion,
that's LEV, isn't it?
You could certainly test them as such, I would thought. So
when I last challenged the HSE on it a few years back, they said it only applies to commercial kitchens. Well, my response was, well, a commercial kitchen is a burger van on the city centre on a Friday night. It's a pub, it's a restaurant, it's a chip shop, it's everything, isn't it? They're selling food for money. That's commercial. And they went, oh no, it's you know, big hospitals and maybe a large school or something like that. Well, how do you draw that line? You know,
is that they're trying to anticipate how much contaminant might be being produced by the cooking process, so they're trying to go around that way.
If you've got the barbecue coal burners, then it is classed as.
Oh yeah.
That's without a shadow of doubt. I think it's just manpower. I think it comes back to they haven't got the manpower to enforce it.
I know. A few years back, we were looking at doing this testing of extraction systems when I was with the previous company. I think things have changed, because when we were looking at that originally, there was a lot of emphasis on looking at oil deposits within the ductwork to an extent that just became impractical. I believe that might have changed since, but I think a lot of the direction seemed to be that they were very concerned that fat and oil deposits would accumulate within the ductwork. So it wasn't just the extraction system which was the problem. A lot of it was how it was getting cleaned as well. So that might be an extra problem that might rear its head. So heads up.
We've had to do some LEV testing of kitchen extraction systems where the HSC inspectors have asked for it, and part of that is a film test. So you have to use like a bit like a slide ruler, and you have to determine the thickness of the grease. Yeah. And
we eventually didn't go ahead with it for one reason or another, but it was looking like it wasn't going to be the easy job the guy who sold the contract thought it was going to be. So.
But also, I think we are about looking at risk and the consequences of something going wrong. If you had a kitchen ventilation that was in a low profile building and it was a single hood and the duct came off, went straight out through the wall and discharged, you might look at it very differently to the same type of kitchen being used either as a domestic or an industrial kitchen that was on the ground floor of a 8 or 9 story building, where the ductwork went up through those 9 floors. So, I mean,
we're in the Grenfell stuff there.
Although the start point may be exactly the same, the route through which this ventilation system goes and the possible consequences of that going wrong for the 8 or 9 floors that were above would make you view it very differently. So, see, there's some discussions at the moment in the fume cupboard world about trying to get some types of banding into the fume cupboard, so that people would say it's band 1, 2, and 3. Now, for me, that's a complication that's unnecessary. If the end user has a benchmark, he goes to the supplier and says, I need a device that can work to give me this end benchmark performance for installation. Why should he get involved in banding? What does banding do? How does it help anybody? It doesn't. It gives, in my view, it gives people a false sense of security, because a generic device such as an LEV capture hood, a fume cupboard, they can perform in any number of applications, but one of the things that would make their performance better or worse generally is the amount of air that's being passed through them. So you could get a fume cupboard that could fail at containment because it's only got 250 cubic meters of air. You put 500 cubic meters of air through exactly the same fume cupboard, it will pass. So generically banding up a fume cupboard or giving a fume cupboard a number, I don't think helps. I think what's more important is for the end user to have an understanding that they need to give the supplier a number or a benchmark so that the supplier can then provide them with the right equipment. And this is something else that reports don't always point out. I mean, does anyone on here get involved with BREEAM? I've seen lots of it. Well, BREEAM, it's a building research establishment thing. It's quite popular, particularly in education. They try to save energy and make things more efficient. And within their work, they have a section on fume cupboards. And in that, they say, if a fume cupboard has less than 0.16 meter cube per second extract per meter width, it can get a BREEAM point. If it has 0.12 meters cubed a second across 1 meter width, it gets 2 BREEAM points. Now, what these BREEAM points are used for is they're often used for when you're trying to get funding. Somebody will say, if you can make your building more energy efficient, we're prepared to work with you with funding. Now, it doesn't have any reflection on whether the fume cupboard works or not.
No, that's absolute nonsense.
So if you turn off your fume cabinets, you get lots of points.
Yeah, but at the beginning of the document, it says your fume cupboard must work in accordance with its requirement. Then it talks about its BREEAM. Now, there's a whole host of fuel cover suppliers saying that their equipment is BREEAM compliant. Well,
And that's speaking to clients.
If a BREEAM certified and authorised agent says it is. So again, the client may be looking at something and think, you know what, this is good. It complies with this British standard. It's BREEAM compliant. This must be what I need. And in both consequences, it might not be what they need. It might not give them the benchmark they need. So I think this is why our reports, we have to be careful when we're writing reports and we make reference to particular documents. Because customers can get a full sense of security from the document. As Adrian said, I think we need to explain to them that these particular documents have been used, but then try to inform them a bit more about what it actually means to them in their application. Question mark that people get on their reports. The main question they get back from their report. I have to say, in a lot of the reports I write, I hardly get a question back.
Same here. You got a question. You think, is that because no one ever reads them? They, you know, my reports tend to be, they're getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and they're quite weighty documents. Do you think, does that just get put on a shelf and does anybody read it?
I think there's a human thing where if you supply somebody with far too much more information they're expecting, they don't read any of it, or they might read the first line, last line, and that's it, done. So, yeah.
It's like CDM, isn't it? I mean, how many CDM reports do you read and CDM files? And there are volumes and volumes of them and never ever been opened, never been visited, never been edited. You know, the reports I like to see when I go to look at something is when they get it out from a drawer very close to them, and it's got, the corners are ripped and it's got coffee stain marks on it, and I think to myself, do you know what, somebody's actually had this out and read it.
Yeah.
Somebody's made a reference to this. I'll get far more confidence than that from when they shuffle off to some central filing system and bring this pristine document along that the pages are still so tight they've never been opened, and you think, crikey, there's 50 pages here, and from page 30 to 42 they're still stuck together. They've never been opened and read. And I think that is something I always try and say to end users. Whenever they contact me, I always say, before you engage me, go and get your last report and read it to see whether I'm the person you need. Do you need me? Or is there someone else that might be better qualified for you to be looking or dealing with? And they say, I don't know where my report is. And I think, God, what a shame. You know, you've paid all this money out and you've just filed it away. So I think for me, one of the things I believe we should try and get over to everybody is that these text reports are not a job for life. They're not a done and finished job. They're a work in progress. They need to be referenced, and it needs to be a manual that people are confident to be able to go back and review and look at, not think, well, I only take this out once a year when the tester comes round.
I think they do. I think that's the approach. I think it's a box ticking exercise. We've had it tested. You know, we still get people say, "Can I have my certificate?" There is no such thing as a certificate. That's what people expect to see. That's what they want. And, you know, it's, again, comes back to that education.
See, you know, I know many people say to me, they say, well, you're never afraid to say you don't understand. And I said, no, because if I say I don't understand, somebody will explain to me, so I do understand. I said, but in my experience, when I tell somebody I don't understand, I find out they don't either.
Yeah.
They don't understand it, so they can't tell me. And I often think, well, what is the point of you all shaking hands afterwards and and being best pals if this is something that none of you actually fully grasp what it means. For me, it's always better to say, can you explain it to me so I can understand it, rather than just smile and say, oh, yeah, I've seen that before. No point. And the same is for the people we give the test reports to. Adrian's right. They don't need to know every single detail, but I think it's important for them to understand the concept behind how their equipment is intended to operate, and particularly how they can interact at certain points and stages to make sure that they are being kept safe themselves. There's lots of things that end users can do to either alert their manager or to alert their duty holder or even to alert the tester to a problem. But if they don't feel that they should be engaging there, that won't happen. So I think for me, one of the things these test reports need is to make sure that that end user feels that they are part of what's going on. They're not just the person that walks to the front and starts to use the device.
I think Gary Madden's having a bit of trouble. If you can hear me, Gary, to switch your microphone on, you need to go into the top right-hand corner. You'll see the video with a slash through and a microphone.
Hi, Louise. Yeah, got it. Thanks. I'm on holiday this week. I'm out in Loch Tay and not got very good signal.
Oh, I can see you keep coming back into the groove.
Yeah, I'm on my phone now, so I should be able to hold on.
Sorry, carry on, guys.
Don't know where we were.
I mean, I'm a member of some BSI panels, and I've been really banging the gong for the last 8 or 10 years to try and say that we shouldn't believe that we are the font of all knowledge. You know, I often talk with field engineers and I think, oh, I've learned something today. So I've been trying to say to my colleagues at BSI, we need to engage more with people outside of our peer group, and that's really paid off, because in the last couple of years they've started to make circulation of some of the standard documents at the inquiry stage more open for public comment. And quite recently we circulated one on articulated extract arms that's used in laboratories. Unfortunately, they tend to be one of these devices where somebody says, well, could you just give us one of those small extract type arm things that I can dangle over the bench, so if I've got anything smelly going on, I can... Wrong. If it's an LEV device, there should be a reason for it, and there should be an understanding of what it's for. So they've just brought out this document. It's PREN 16589, and it's articulated extract arms in laboratories. And I managed to circulate that out to quite a few people who are on this LEV forum, and many of them sent in some really, really good comments. And now at BSI, we're going through to dissolve these comments over the next 2 weeks. And many of the comments received in from this LEV forum group, people who are on this talk today have sent comments in. Their comments are going to be going forward to the Central European body, that's CEN TC 332. They are the laboratory technical committee at CEN, and these comments are going to be going through to them. Now, I think that's really good, because now we're getting people who are involved in the day-to-day activities of looking after these LED devices, bringing their knowledge, their experience back into the work, so that when a standard is written, it's actually considering what's going on in the field, rather than many standards, unfortunately, are written around a manufacturer's requirement, because they are the lead people that get involved in the work. But that's now being broadened. So again, the text reports that people are writing are influencing how the standards are being written.
Melvin, just for everyone, because you and I have had this conversation before, but just for everyone else who's on the call understanding, can you explain how difficult it is to be on a BSI standard body, the cost, the travel, the implications, and that actually by having this in that we have, it's really quite unique and very, very fortunate to have it.
One of the things with any of the standard committees, they look to have people who have an experience and a knowledge that can provide some input to the work. Because BSI doesn't just write BSI standards, it contributes to ISO standards and SEN standards. And so members of BSI panels also represent the UK in these European panels. And quite often, many of the standards are actually written as product standards to provide a level playing field for users. But because these are products that are used in areas that need to be safe, they have a lot of safety connotations. There is a lot of safety features in the standard, and the standards produce a test that allows you to test the device. So when BSI are trying to structure their panels, they try and get people that have got experience, knowledge, and ability and commitment, because it's a big commitment. You do not get paid as a BSI panel member. It's all voluntary. So BSI panels tend to be made up of people that are in the industry working, and they're supported by their employers. So what tends to be the way is the bigger employers can give their employees more time to be involved in the panels. They can give them more resources, and they can also fund them, because a lot of the work that's done at BSI panels actually does need research work doing. If somebody on the panel comes up with an idea, you need to be able to research that idea to see if it works. And very often the panel members will go back to their employers and say, well, look, we need to research this. And the employers will say, okay, we'll give you a couple of weeks to get this research work done and we'll fund it. But regrettably, what happens is that tends to be manufacturers. And so you find standards are structured very commonly around a manufacturer. And often the end user's viewpoint is not always picked up at an early stage. Now, you do have other people that work in standard committees who are either retired people like myself, who have spent a lot of years in the industry. And what we try to do now is to work on the panels and give something back to the work that we've had in our time, in our 50 years of working in the industry. But one of the things that we lack, of course, is we lack the resources to do the research work. So we have to try and keep engaged with our partners that are helping with this work, because it's important that everybody contributes to the standards. So now, because we're engaging more with people, particularly at the public inquiry, because what will happen is when a standard is written, standard is sent back to the bodies who have asked for this standard to be prepared, and the standard is done as a draft. It gets to a stage where then they will say, we'll have an inquiry. That inquiry is circulated within the national bodies, and we get public comments in. Once we've got those public comments, that draft then goes back to the technical committee. They'll look at these public comments and decide, can they be incorporated back into this work? If they can, and it's felt that they would necessarily make the work better, that work is then incorporated. Then that inquiry comes back out again to the national bodies, and a formal vote is taken as to whether the work is considered solid and, if you like, robust enough to be issued as a standard. If it isn't considered robust enough to publish as a European norm, they can then decide whether it can be published as what they call a European technical specification. It's just one stage back from a norm. It's still got the information, but it's not considered just quite solid enough for a European norm. If it's not enough for a technical specification, it can be published as a technical report, which is just one stage down from a technical specification. So even though comments that come back from inquiry might not get into a European norm, they could still go into one of these technical specifications or technical reports, which are still used At the moment, the EM16589 is a technical report. What they're trying to do now is to see whether they can increase its technical capability to become a European norm. And one of the things that stopped it last time when it was looked at was the fact that the testing procedures that were used by the manufacturers of these articulated arms were not considered quite robust enough to be repeatable, so that you could get repeatable results tested by anybody. So I always say to people, never ever be afraid to write into British standards when you know there's work being done, and make your views known, because when you make that contact, that report is sent to the secretary of the committee that's looking at the work. That secretary then issues it into the panel, and the panel do get to hear your view. You may not be sitting on the panel, but that doesn't prevent your views going forward. So I always encourage people, if you've got an opinion, write into British Standard, make it known that you want the panel to have a look at your view, and the panel will do that.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Got lots of ideas.
I mean, I've lost track of the number of times when I hear an engineer saying, oh, I'm testing in accordance with this report, and whoever wrote this didn't understand this, whoever wrote this didn't think about that. And I say to them, you make that known to the people that wrote the report. Those reports are reviewed every 2 to 4 years. They're generally reviewed every 2 years, but they have a major review every 4 years. So even if your comment doesn't get in immediately, it can be lodged with the panel, and when the panel look at their reviews, they can pick up those comments. The same is being done for microbiological safety cabinets at the moment. The EM12469 is under review. Lots of comments coming in from people outside of the industry that's been picked up and taken forward to the European panel on that work. So it's important. You know, don't anyone who's on this call, never ever think just because you're not on the committee or you're not on the panel that your views aren't important, because they are. And I tend to find that your views are what makes the committee stop and think about their own.
And it's important that we voice them. Because if we don't voice them, we'll be sat here in 5 years' time going, that standard's rubbish, and why are we doing this, and why didn't nobody ever listen to us? So encourage people, you know, to have a read of these things, and to put it, no matter what you think, whether you think it's stupid or no one else is going to listen to it, send it in.
Yeah,
you know?
it's important. And it's the same when people have views about what's going on. And I mean, our pals at HSE are in a bit of a rock and a hard place. They always seem to be the one that gets challenged first. You know, HSE should have done this, HSE should have done that. HSE are no different. If people got views, they should write to HSE and let them know what they are.
Yeah.
When HSE carry out their reviews, they'll pick up those comments. They're not thrown away or shelved. Somebody at HSE does log them, they look at them, but when that work is reviewed, those comments are picked up and they go forward. So, you know, I'm not a great supporter of somebody just saying it's the standard, I'm going to use it. I like to hear people saying, I've got views on this and I'm going to write and ask how they arrived at this number. I mean, quite recently, somebody wrote to me and said, the EM14175 standard for fume cupboards, how do I follow it? And I said, well, it is quite easy to follow because it's currently written in 7 parts. The first 5 parts give you the basic framework. Then the next 2 parts, part 6 and part 7, are for more specialist fume cupboards. So once you understand the basic framework, you can then really understand why the part 6, which is variable air volume fume cupboards, and the part 7, which is high heat load fume cupboards, are written the way they are. If you just pick up the part 6 and the part 7, you would find it difficult to understand why you're being asked to do work a certain way or do a test a certain way. If you've read the parts 1 to 5, you would understand it. So very commonly, it's not that you need to know chapter and verse all the 7 parts. You just need to know where to go to read what you've got to do.
I think a big problem is because the British standards are quite expensive, a lot of, particularly the SMEs in the LEV industry, don't have a subscription to the British standards. But for anybody in this meeting or watching this now, if you've got a library card, go onto your library website, and sometimes, not all libraries and districts have the same access, but they give free access to the British standards for you. So you need your library card, or you can go into your library. They generally have hard copies of all the standards.
That's good.
So that's the way you can look at them.
They're extremely expensive pieces of kit, a British standard. You know, when
there's lots of them.
The fume cupboard standards written in 7 parts, and if you wanted to buy all 7 parts, if you're a non-member, if you're not a BSI subscribing member, you're looking at the best part of £600 to £700 to get all those parts. And unfortunately, people will say, well, I haven't got £700 but the library is a very good starting point, because most libraries can make those copies available to you for a short time, and you only need them for a short time.
Yeah.
Because it's just looking at where that guidance is and checking certain parts of it. It's very unusual that you would be referencing those 7 parts every single day throughout the year. And
my library shows them free online, so I can read them on the internet. You just can't print them. So you can read them on your screen easy enough, you just can't print them.
Yeah. You might want to check out the Estonian Standards Committee, because they publish a lot of standards in English, and they publish them for, I mean, you can buy, I think you can buy all 7 or 8 parts of the EN 14175 for less than you can pay for 1 part from BS. It's the Estonian standard, and it's published in English. So look it up. It's worth the visit.
What are people's thoughts on the open bag filter units?
I was going to try and ask you about this, Louise. I've noticed you've been doing a lot of testing with particle counters around those, yeah?
Yes, yeah, that was following the last meeting that we had.
Yeah.
Circulating dust filter units.
How are you finding that? Whenever I've used particle counters, I've found that you can get very different numbers just moving slightly, or if somebody's scuffing by, it'll start spiking it. Have you been finding it's a useful way of testing?
Yeah, you've got to be careful, and you've got to be very, I wouldn't say precise, but yeah, you've got to have method in what you're doing. So if it's an open bag unit and you can see there's dust on the clean side, I would have it right next to where the bag's going to kind of pop up. And read that way. But yeah, I use them heavily. Customers for us tend to take more note if they see a big figure. They're like, oh, what does that mean? I mean, well, you breathe all that in, and they're like, wow. So it is a useful tool.
Yeah. I mean, we've always had kind of visual inspections thereof, and usually they come into the categories of that's really clean and it's obviously been maintained, or that's absolutely minging and it's probably never been cleaned in its entire existence. There's often not much in between the two. But yeah, the particle counter thing's quite useful. What kind of figures are you getting for something that you would fail and something that you would pass? And
oh, fail, you can be getting anything from 12 microns up. But again, the particle counter is only indicative, so I'd probably use a Tyndall lamp and get the camera out to really, you know, show how much dust is evident.
Yeah. You get a nice picture of those, yeah, sometimes.
But the point I was kind of more getting at is you see them applied to circular saws and fret saws and band saws, you know, that produce really fine explosive wood dust. Which obviously has ATEX implications, but I just wanted to know what everybody else does, really. Would you fail them?
If we see a dirty one, we always put that on the urgent jobs that need to be completed. Whether or not the whole system fails or not is a question, but often it would be veering towards a fail.
Yeah.
Because at that point, you're usually there's so many things going wrong at that point, but yeah, you're basically reintroducing fine dust straight back onto the operator. We'll often also, if we're doing air testing, I'll often have an IOM set up quite close by, and we've often been able to come back with quite heavy concentrations, you know, like 3.5 milligrams plus, near the recirculating filters, which, you know, indicate very much so that ain't working.
Another
Else been doing anything?
just wanted to add on that. I had a discussion with a HSE inspector on site recently, and they said there's been an increase in people using particle counters, but they're not detailed on what they're doing with that particle counter. So if you're holding it up to the outlet of a filter unit, you need to write that in the report. If you're only holding it in place for a minute, that's fine. If you've established it's a fail, that's fine, but you need to write that in your report. They need a bit more, I suppose, more quantitative information so that they can make a decision on, you know, is your report adequate?
Yeah. Yeah. It would be nice if they'd have given their opinions about what levels you should be expecting. And the areas where I'm thinking it might be difficult is when, you know, as you were saying, you might have a set of saw going and somebody's routering in the background and something else is going on over there, and you're trying to fine tune with this particular bit of dust coming from. Is it coming from the recirculating filter, or is it coming from the guy who's doing hand sanding at the next table over?
Yeah, and then that has another crossover problem in that if they've been doing hand sanding, the likelihood is they've got no control in place for the hand sanding.
Yeah, which is
So
why I
that
brought
hand
that one
sanded
up.
dust is
Yeah.
probably going to go on the filter unit.
Yeah. So one problem leads on to the next problem. So yeah, it's a tricky one.
I would like to see them banned personally, these open bag filters, but
Well,
I don't think that'll ever happen.
they're heading in that rough direction from my reading between the lines, but when that'll happen, I don't know. On the subject of recirculating filters, a couple of years back, the L-type filter was acceptable for on-tool extraction kind of things, and now it's M-type. So you can go around places where they've bought all the guys all L-type Festool control units, and now they're getting told to basically phase them out and replace them. I'm not sure if anybody's had a word with the HSE to see what level of severity they're looking at that kind of situation. Is it a carryover from the fabrics bag kind of thing filtering through, or are they actually saying that these brand new Festool units you bought are no longer acceptable?
What I would think of there, Jeff, is particularly in the type of work that I'm mainly involved in, which is fume cupboards. They have recirculation filtration fume cupboards.
And they do, yeah.
What always concerns me is the generic identity of the device. It's a recirculation filtration device, and the filtration will be assured or commissioned to a certain level. But then I always try and say to people, you have to think about also, particularly if the device is a portable device, it can be moved from one location to another. What's the volumetric space you're using it in? Because if you're pushing out a level of concentration that's after the filter, which there will always be, because none of them are going to be 100%, there'll always be carryover. If you've got carryover in a room that's 500 cubic meters, it's going to be less of a problem generally in the room than if you're using the same device in a room that's only 30 cubic meters. The smaller room, there's more risk of a build-up of the concentration over a period of time there is in the larger room. Although I accept, if you're working close to where the filter returns the air back to the room, the risk remains the same, but the overall risk of the concentration that passes after the filter back into the room will be different. If you're, I mean, I often see people where they'll wheel a small recirculation filtration cupboard into it. I can only describe it as a broom cupboard. That's what it is, and they'll put it in and they'll start using it, and I'll say, well, you shouldn't be in here with this.
Yeah, it makes sense. Sorry, my camera keeps going off and on.
So I think you need to look a bit more widely at not just the carryover after the filter, but where it's being used and how it's being used.
Well, I think we'll wrap the meeting up. So thanks everybody for attending. Before you go, we are doing a charity event in September next month called 12,000 miles. So you can walk, run, swim, cycle, whatever. And we're raising money for the British Lung Foundation. So I'll pop a new link on LinkedIn. But yeah, please get involved. We'd love to have you on board.
Okay.
And thanks everybody for joining in today. It's been another wonderful meeting.
Yeah. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, Louise.
And have a great weekend.
Yeah, and I wish everybody well.
Cheers, everyone.
Okay.
See ya.
Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
All right.